Welcome to Green and Red, Scrappy Politics for Scrappy People, a regular podcast on radical environmental and anti-capitalist politics, brought to you by Bob Bazanko and Scott Parkin.
Hi, this is Bob Bazanko, co-host of the Green and Red podcast. Scott has a commitment today, but we wanted to get on as soon as possible to talk to our guest here who has been in the news lately and has been doing some really important work for quite a long time. Today we're talking with Jodie Evans, who we've had on before, who is a co-founder and activist in Code Pink. But today we'll be talking about that a bit, but we'll also be talking because I think it was 3 weeks ago, the New York Times had this breathless piece about these American groups which are doing propaganda work for the People's Republic of China government. And it featured Jodie and her partner. Is it Neville Singham or Neville
Yes.
Roy Singham? I'm sorry
Yeah.
about that. I wrote it down. And but it also talked about Code Pink. It talked about Tricontinental and other groups too. And it's really kind of a classic Cold War McCarthyite hit piece, where the New York Times has this breathless expose. It unraveled a financial network that stretches from Chicago to Shanghai and uses American nonprofits to push Chinese talking points worldwide. I mean, that's like something like the Voice of America would have said it in 1951, right? And it talks a lot about one of the groups that you're associated with. I don't know if you're founder of it or not, No Cold War, and then other groups as well. So let's just get started by saying the article is basically implying in these very kind of sketchy ways that your groups that you and Neville Roy Singham are associated with, are taking all this money from the People's Republic of China to essentially, I don't know what, do dirty deeds here at home. So I guess first you want to talk about these groups and any relationship they have, just so let people know what's really going on here.
Well, what's really going on is to be able to take what the goal of this campaign was, and it's been made very personal so people can actually see it better. When I started this campaign, China is not our enemy, I started it because I saw the propaganda. I saw the pattern of what takes us to war. Here's the propaganda. Every mainstream paper is reporting the same information from the same person across. Every talking point is exactly the same. And I went, oh my God, are they really thinking of going to war on China? This is 3.5 years ago. And I'm like, oh, they can't do that. China's a nuclear power. And that would be insane. I also noticed that the propaganda was meant to weaponize the hearts and minds of progressives. All the stories that were coming out were ones that would just grab the progressives' hearts and minds. I was like, oh no, really? They're going to take my friends and use them as the vanguard for this war? No, I'm not going to let that happen. So literally this campaign has been about propaganda. So to be then in the most ironical way used as propaganda for the propaganda has been quite fascinating, because it's all lies, it's all distortion and innuendo and embarrassed. I mean, actually, when I finished reading it, because it was just so stupid, I felt more sorry for the reporters who had kind of destroyed themselves, threw themselves on the sword of the empire for this really horrible article that was, McCarthyism so clearly, witch hunt. When you saw how people would read it and what they would call it, it was just obvious on its face. It's a hit job. It's a witch hunt. It's McCarthyism. It's clearly propaganda to undermine those people who are saying we should have peace with China. God forbid. It's no different than what happens when we say we should have peace because we need diplomacy in Ukraine. They call us Putin lovers. It's just the same.
We've gotten plenty of that too.
But this was, this was clearly coming from the government. The questions that we got were clearly written. It wasn't journalism. It was an attack piece from the minute it started. And so, we've disrupted the committee. I call it the Congressional Committee to Hate on China. Ever since the very first meeting that was at prime time, the first time I'd ever seen a congressional hearing, prime time. we're in there with our banner, China's not our enemy. And why China is not our enemy is called a Chinese government talking point, I'm not sure. But I think they've decided that that must be a Chinese government talking point. I don't even know what Chinese government talking points are. I think a lot of journalists would love to see them, but it's just that the United States has relegated peace to China should be a concern of everyone. Like, really? Because again, we also went to Blinken, Medea, and got to Blinken and said, well, China has a peace plan. Where is yours? So it's not our fault that China is leading on peace, because we're peace activists, our whole lives. Me for, since 1968, Medea since 1968. That's what we've been doing with our lives. But now all of a sudden, peace is un-American and it belongs to these other countries. That it's kind of like peace is un-American, really?
Well, this is really formulaic too, because like I said, it's kind of boilerplate from articles you could have read in 1951. And it focuses, it throws out these like numbers and kind of spectacular things and about fight or something. And then it dies. It doesn't really go back to it. At one point, they talked about hundreds of millions of dollars and this and that. But then when they actually talk about something, at one point they mentioned a $1.4 million donation over the course of 5 years or something like that. So even when they throw this spectacular stuff out that's supposed to get you all upset, it just fizzles. There's nothing there with it, which is really, really terrifying. So basically, and we've had you on before actually talking about China, and this is the part that I think is really most outrageous. It's, essentially we're advocating for a real toning down of these temperatures here. And what strikes me is, who says the same thing you're saying? Mark Milley, the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who said, we need to ratchet down this rhetoric on China. We don't need a war there, right? So I don't know if they're coming after him next, but just in general,
Kissinger was just sitting next to
Xi.
Xi.
Kissinger was just with Xi, right?
I don't know Xi.
This is kind of a silly thing, and it's something I've grappled with my whole life. Like, how do you deal with a political society that immediately says you're a socialist, you're a Marxist, you're a radical, whatever, for simply saying, like I get this, like when I talk about Ukraine, man, I call them the NATO left. These people who call themselves socialists, but they're all down with NATO. They want to get rid of the government of Cuba. They want to double down in Ukraine, and they hate Iran, and they hate all the victims of American empire, right? I mean, have you had much run-in? One thing that whenever stuff like this happens, and with the McCarthy period, that always intrigues me is how other people who would call themselves on the left respond to it. And I know I did see just on social media, and I don't want to make too much of that, when that article came out, there were a lot of, I guess, kind of liberal types who were very upset about it. And it did imply in the article that there were people who they were talking to who worked with some of these groups. And what generally kind of response have you gotten from, not from the state or from the New York Times, but from people who normally would be more or less allies?
Oh, just tons of support.
Right.
I would say that Saturday, I kind of joked that it was better than my birthday because I got so much love and support.
Oh, good.
And also, when I say that kind of we were used as fodder for the thing of the campaign, what was interesting is a lot of my liberal friends said, oh my God, you were right. The New York Times did this. It actually made people that I've been trying to convince about the New York Times being propaganda go, oh, whoa. So, especially people that know me, it was so that was when it's someone who knows me, it's so clearly lies and propaganda. But also, that lots of articles have been written. FAIR came right out, and
I had read that.
And then we launched a campaign the next day because it's like, what do I do when I'm attacked? Well, and people are being stupid. It's just like we go into action, and so the action was.
What's the campaign? And how
so it's called McCarthyism and back together. We can stop it.
Yeah.
And so we pulled together a coalition of groups, and it's like about 25 groups, and the next day put it out, and lots of signers. Abby Martin, Ben Cohen, Ben Norton.
Rena Red Podcast signed it.
Yeah, you guys, so it's like a wide variety of people across the spectrum, because I think one of the things I look at about this is like, wow, it united the left in a way we haven't really been united because of the fracturing of the Ukraine war. It gave us something really to come together about, which felt very good to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And also, Code Pink from the very beginning. I lived in Los Angeles. I heard, Bush talking about a war in an innocent country, Iraq, and I just put myself on a plane and flew and got with Medea, and we started, Code Pink, not as an organization, but saying Code Pink outside the White House when he was using the color-coded alerts to frighten the American people into war. So always who we are at Code Pink is seeing smoke and saying smoke before it's fire, and to stop the fire. So no different in this is like, that's smoke. We can take it lightly, but it's actual smoke. And that will come for everyone if we don't talk about it right now. That becomes a fire. And it's kind of like what you're saying, this relates to the past, but people in the United States are so ahistorical that we need to now bring up what this tool is and why they're using it. And that's why the next day it was so important to launch the McCarthyism campaign, because to re-educate about how the media and the war machine work together, and how this silencing effect is happening. And we've already seen it, but here we are. We're in it. We can see the smoke. We've got to stop this fire. We've got to work together. We've got to come together. First they come for us and then they come for you. Needs to be something that we remain conscious about, because things. It's a shake.
Did the Times approach you or Neville either before or after for some input on this? Or?
Yeah, they sent us questions, like I said, that they weren't journalism, they were attack questions. Both of us sent in a statement, I think a little piece of each of our statements in the article.
Yeah.
The one that says, we've never worked for foreign government or listened to anyone besides our own values and consciousness.
I think it's also striking because so few people actually understand how foreign relations works. Independent groups, NGOs, research groups, whatever you want to call them, are all over the place. And obviously the big ones are like for Israel and Saudi and groups like that. I know a lot of scholars who've like gone to those countries on those countries' dimes, they're basically propaganda, talking about propaganda to us, right? So I think people don't understand, just because the country that you're talking about, one of the countries you're talking about is, and the other thing about this, it made it sound like China was the only issue you're dealing with, right? So I think that's important too, to kind of let people know, and you guys are doing a ton of stuff. You're dealing with sanctions.
It's a little campaign and many campaigns, and there's unfortunately the U.S. empire is being pretty violent around the world. Yeah. So it's not the only thing we're doing, of course not, including around the planet. One of our big campaigns, and why I think Ukraine and China are so important right now, is not just to end the war, which we always want to do, is peace for the people, for people to actually have a fulfilling life, because war disturbs that. But in the last few years, all the numbers have come out that shows that war is the greatest contributor to climate change.
Yeah.
So it's like layers on layers. And then being inside the United States and the unraveling of the fabric of our society in the last 22 years since the war on terror, that cost $22 trillion of US taxpayer money. And the cost of war at Brown just came out, 4.2 million lives. That's one thing, it's like we get a lot of propaganda, but what we don't get is the truth. And I think when, we get attacked for trying to tell the truth and getting buzzsawed. I was in Congress a few weeks ago, and a member of Congress actually said, if you start to talk about peace, you get buzzsawed, that it's just not allowed. And I came back from that, I was like, let's just talk about peace all summer. So we launched our Summer of Peace campaign, because really, are we not allowed to talk about peace? That is damning to everything we care about. Look at the infrastructure of this country has not been invested in. Instead, that money's been invested in the destruction of the planet and the murdering of innocent people.
Well, like getting specifically about China, because this is like obviously a huge issue, Ukraine and China, but, and I've written about this, you know, first of all, there's a one China policy in effect. So legally, Taiwan's not independent. It's not sovereign. It's part of China, right? And there are, I think, 6 agreements with the U.S. government for one China policy, which started with Carter, and then, you know, many since then. What is your particular, right? Like, you obviously, we want peace, right? That should go without saying. What else, though, is part, because the Times, what I'm getting at here is the Times makes all these allegations or hints, doesn't really make any allegations, it doesn't have anything, but it makes all these hints about, you know, the Chinese, and you're covering up and you're doing propaganda and all that. And it makes it sound like you're being orchestrated, you know, out of Beijing or wherever. What is the role of China within the larger context of everything you're doing?
Well, you know, China isn't a part of our work. I mean, our work, because I'm a US citizen, is always targeted towards the government that I live within. So the work is, first of all, this propaganda and hate directed towards China already has casualties, and they're Asian Americans. So the first work is to stop the hate and propaganda, because it is affecting horribly Asian Americans, because in America, nobody can tell where Asians are from. But I mean, that's where I was doing the work a lot, like for the last 3 years, but really disturbingly, in the last few weeks, a report has come out, and it says that 3 in 4 Chinese Americans in the last 12 months have experienced hate and violence, and the people are afraid to leave their homes. So let's just start there. Like, China is not in my, you know, it's like, do I care about Iran government, or, you know, I'm about people's lives. I'm about peace. So always my work is driven from what I see that is taking us into hate, violence, and war, because that is destructive to the people on the planet. So China is not in the conversation, except when I see total distortion. And I'm like, but wait a sec, because I care about people being able to think, you know, one of the campaigns out of this, you know, China's not our enemy, is that PBS produced a movie about how China took everyone out of poverty. It was made by a Wall Street banker, an Emmy Award-winning American filmmaker. They went and shot it. They came home, they edited it. PBS loved it. They produced it. They put it on the air, and people made them take it down because it made Beijing look too good. So if I care about American citizens and they're not allowed to think critically around a country of 1.4 billion people, if they can't know that country because to know it might be to love some part of it, that is crazy. I mean, that's not how I would want, first of all, you know, my kids, my grandkids, the people I love, which therefore is everyone. Why would I want them to live in such a distorted, dark view of China? I mean, every country is complex, and it's got its dark sides and its light sides and its beauty. And basically every country is about its people, and the governments are, you know, messed up on steroids. So, you know, to not be, you know, one of the things when I say the casualties are Asian Americans, one of the things in the last year that's been really painful is all these very young Asian Americans that have been coming to me and saying, I feel crazy. I'm American and my culture is Chinese. And this is really disturbing. They are disturbed. And I just did an interview with a young woman who talked about the fear of being able to go out, who talked about how hard their lives are right now, and also shared the pain of how proud she is of her country. Like, can you imagine being from a country that took itself from the poorest country in 1970 to, you know, neck and neck with the United States economy? But it's not about neck and neck with the United States economy. For her, her mom knew her grandmother who had bound feet. And, you know, for her to be who she is in relationship to that in time is profound. Or to have, you know, everyone get out of poverty, or to have the air in in Beijing and Shanghai so clean. I mean, to have a country where change happens so fast you can't keep up with it, like from one year to the next, it's a different place. And to be proud of that, or to be proud of the intelligence that's driving innovation right now and being at the cutting edge of that, that you can't be proud of that because the United States is driving hate and wants to go to war on you. That's messed up.
According to the Times again, the groups you're associated with, because they're very vague, not really sure if they ever have any like specific stuff that they're saying, but it said that you've met with congressional aides, you've trained politicians, including in South Africa, and you've organized protests. Now, I've met with congressional aides. A lot of people I know have trained politicians abroad and activists, and I've organized protests. So like when you read that, what are they saying, and like what do you think about kind of how they're trying to pinprick this stuff and turn it into something salacious?
I mean, there's nothing there, so I don't actually think about it. I just think, wow, that was a stretch. You really had to go low to try to scratch at me. You're nowhere near reality.
Doesn't that say something about Americans though? Because they'll hear like they met with congressional aides, they trained, and there's kind of a gasp. That happens. It's happening every day. Groups on the left don't have anywhere near the firepower or funding, as you know, that the state does.
Our budget is under $1 million a year. Yeah. I mean, we're funded by 30,000 donors.
Yeah.
And peace is not funded by anyone. So it doesn't even show up on the what you could fund list. But and as you said earlier, it's like groups like AIPAC that haven't filed FARA, who are clearly arms of the Israeli government.
Yeah, there's nothing comparative to that. Nothing close.
You're asking me, it's like I don't think about it because it doesn't have any relationship to reality. So I'm working on peace. I am not going to waste my time thinking about something that has absolutely no relationship with reality. It's actually insulting to all of us. I was talking to Vijay from Tricontinental Institute, who's also mentioned in the article. Right. And I was saying, like, really, the New York Times is going to say a feminist who's been doing this her whole life, who anybody who knows doesn't listen to anyone, including her husband. Who's going to even think that? And he's like, he said the same, like, really, someone's going to believe Vijay Prashad is listening to a government? It's insulting to every one of those voices that is no Cold War. If you look at the collective that is no Cold War, that yes, Code Pink is part of, but every single one of those voices is a profound, voice that has been for peace for decades of their lives. They are intellectuals, they are movement leaders. It's the People's Forum. I mean, those are young Black and brown leaders of grassroots organizations. They're listening to another government. No, they each one of these things, Code Pink, Tricontinental, No Cold War, the People's Forum, they arise out of a set of values. And I mean, I think that's what made it easy for all of us, that we're all rooted in values. So, for us, that's just looking at people who were used by power that weren't rooted in a set of values, including even just the value of journalism and truth. And that's sad, but it doesn't distract us from our work. It actually, I would say, fuels us even more that this is serious and that we're getting to them and that they had to do this, that they, this steamrolling of this war over the U.S. citizens, that this new NDAA, the bill that funds the military, is going to get to $1 trillion because we've got to protect ourselves from China. Even the conversation that says China is doing anything to the United States, when the United States has 250 bases surrounding China and China has no bases. China has one base outside of China. It's in Djibouti, which United States asked them to be a joint cooperation with the pirates. But what we need with China and what this campaign has been about is we need cooperation. We need cooperation. At this moment in history, when we're, especially after this summer of death and destruction and fires and floods, we need more than anything cooperation. on AI, which AI like could just destroy humanity itself. But then you've got climate change. And that instead of like cooperating on climate change, that you're instead playing with fire of another nuclear power is unconscionable. It's a crime. And it's insanity. I mean, I think all of us look at this and think, who is behind this? What level of insanity is operating right now?
This is a Green and Red podcast. I'm Bob Bazanko, co-host. Scott has family stuff right now, and we are talking with Jodie Evans, who's a co-founder of Code Pink and is also involved with No Cold War and other groups who were recently the target of a big kind of McCarthyite smear from the New York Times, and we're talking about that. And yeah, I mean, as you pointed out, the rhetoric on China is insane, right? TikTok and balloons, air balloons, weather balloons, and Wuhan and COVID and and all this stuff. So it's
anything that goes wrong, if anyone has a complaint, it's China's fault.
I know a bunch of people, Vietnam, that's what they do. Whenever something happens in Vietnam, they blame China, right? And that's kind of the Cold War in the United States. It's somehow one of the things that's really stunning and actually even somewhat surprising is the way that since Trump started this kind of they're communist, they're socialist, they're Marxist. I mean, I haven't talked to, but I've heard people say that, they genuinely believe that like Kamala Harris is a socialist and stuff like that. So we're in this bizarre political, and that makes me wonder, like, because when you look at, again, what they actually said, for instance, with Code Pink, I think they said that Code Pink has received $1.4 million since 2014. That's $140,000 a year. I don't know, like, if that's supposed to shock you, but like, that's hard to live on, So what is it that takes like groups like you guys who are really in the big picture, and I don't mean this as a criticism, but you're not that big, right? And we're certainly, no one on the left is that influential, right? Not that many people in power are listening to us. So why would they pluck this and obviously spend a lot of time? They assign reporters to it. Why would groups like yours be so important that they would spend this energy and this time and this money to infiltrate you, which is basically what they've done, right? And I don't know if they have like moles inside, but my point is, they're trying to get at your inner workings. I mean, why would they do that? Did you have any inkling that you guys were on the radar like that, or?
No, I think that, like I said, we've disrupted this Hate China committee since the very beginning and not letting it get away with hate. And we're not going to let it happen, and we're not going to back down. This isn't going to back us down. This is serious. I mean, for us, this is super serious. And it seems for them, hating China just is like the top of the list.
Yeah.
And it's not okay. And we're not going to shut up. And I mean, I think it exposes a fragility that the empire is feeling right now. It's a fragile empire. It's fragile internally. It's fragile externally. We just saw with BRICS that, people, if you think back to the Iraq War when they were able to blackmail everyone into the coalition of the willing, well, we're a long way from that. So if we look at the last 22 years and the amount of money and the amount of lives, well, let's look at the global South. A little bit that pivot kind of happened with the Ukraine war, where all these wars on Black and brown people have been okay, that the empire has been destroying and killing and raping and pillaging until you get to Ukraine, and that became, all of a sudden like, whoa. And so now you have the global South, understanding the level of violence and oppression and extraction that they're experiencing, and them coming together to try to find out something else to do together. So I think it exposes the fragility of the empire right now. It's a fragile space. Now that's a worrisome thought, not a pleasant thought, because it also has all the money and all the weapons. So it's a very scary thought. But I think that I guess because I'm an activist, whenever I see these things, when I, how do I address climate change? How do I address war? I just I go into action and do everything that I personally can do to affect that. And so that's what we do at Code Pink. It's like I said, when there's smoke, let's try to stop the fire. And that's what we do. But I would say that it's a very worrisome thing that the US empire is dipping so low as McCarthyism, which was shameful. I mean, we look back at that, right? Historically, and we're ashamed of that. We're ashamed of how we treated
A lot
Japanese.
of Trump's people are now praising McCarthy, so he's making a renaissance.
Yeah, but um,
Uh,
that's
um,
because we've decided that, wanting equality for all seems to
yeah,
not, isn't where their values are. And like, okay, that's their values. But I would assume that most people in the United States have a value of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is peace. If without peace, there's no pursuit of happiness. So, it's a time of a fragile empire and they're behaving poorly.
one thing that I think is important too
The
is,
blood on their hands in Ukraine.
oh, absolutely.
The blood on your hands in Yemen, what's happening in Niger. There's just so much dripping blood on the hands of the empire that you just watch the pattern and it keeps pivoting to another war, thinking it's going to distract everybody with another shiny bauble that for some reason seems to calm the hearts and minds of people for a minute. It's like a drug, that somehow the American hearts and minds have been addicted to this drip, drip, drip of war that will put it to sleep for a while instead of wake it up to the violence and the oppression and just the pure vile ugliness of that arm that reaches beyond our shores.
I think one thing that's really striking too with China, especially, is the disparity in power between these two states. Because the United States, 800 bases, it has, I think, 23 carriers to, I don't know, a few for China. I wrote a piece on this recently. I'll send it to you, where I kind of laid that out. Like, setting aside any political or moral, whatever word you want to use, like, there's just like the military capacities of these two are so widely disproportionate, right? And so the U.S., I get the sense, is like, as you point out, it's an evaporating empire. It's in so many ways, it's in bad shape. And then, one thing I like to talk about too is like what they're not doing at home. I'm, in Ohio, I live near East Palestine. We have Hawaii now, Flint, Jackson. I've been police all over the place, and healthcare and everything, COVID, another surge. So in order, like, we have all this going on, and yet you have this ferocious, assault on Chinese sovereignty and on, and the thing is too, like, with Russia, I think is very different. Like, I'm not going to say anything nice about Putin, but the reality is 500,000 casualties have already been inflicted in that war. I think 300,000 dead. And it's to be so casual about, especially people who call themselves lefties, to say, no, we have to continue to support Ukraine and we have to continue to do this and that, is really chilling. I think, as Scott and I always say, like, growing up on the left, that was like the core value, I think, was peace, right? Life, right? One last thing I want to talk about, because I think this is important. Whenever a story like this comes out, you see this. But at one point, Times reporters said that there were left groups, and I think they left it vague like that, who they contacted, but they wouldn't talk because they were afraid of you. And I know you're a very frightening person, but do you think there's actually kind of an issue on the left about stuff like this, or are they just kind of like trying to shake everybody up?
No, I think that's as much of a lie. I mean, as distortion and innuendo as the rest of it.
It's in every story ever. People are afraid to talk about it.
Of course, there's NGOs inside of Washington that serve the American military and government. So I know that, and we see it all the time. So they're going to be called left, but they're not really. They're probably liberal, or just their job is to keep the status quo, leap going around and round and nothing really happening. So, but with the China's not our enemy campaign, it's been a very big tent. From the very beginning, I worked very hard. Partners like Quincy, it's a big tent. This is, the partners in this campaign, the people with the sharing the voice in this campaign, a lot of them are capitalists who make shit. because they don't want this war. I mean, Janet Yellen, you know, Senator Kerry, it's not a left campaign. It's you know, there are other sane people alive still that know that this is a really, really bad idea. So, I mean, you know, I feel like that, like, I don't know if anybody's afraid of me. I don't bite, but I accept, you know, I disrupt people in power who lie, but that's, you know, the extent of me. But I think that this, you know, Kissinger is the last person I'd want to be on the same side of. But, you know, Kissinger, you know, General Miller, it's like, there are generals, there are people who really get that this is a horrible idea. My old boss, Jerry Brown, you know, wrote a piece in Politico a few months ago about it. You know, one of the interesting things about this is that I was talking to, I think it was someone in Rocana's office, Congressman Rocana's office, and I said, you know, this committee that you're serving on, this Hate China committee, already has effects. Like, no. It's like, yes, Jerry Brown, with the #1 guy in China at the Paris climate talks, created a school at Berkeley. It's the US-China Cooperation on the Planet school at Berkeley. They at Berkeley, as soon as that committee got formed, shut down. That's a chilling effect. That's real, because that's what's needed, is that cooperation. That's what needed, is for those professors and thinkers to be talking together about how we work on the health of the planet and on climate change. But it got shut down because they were too afraid.
Yeah.
So that McCarthyism is happening, and we know it's like, it's not going to make No Cold War or Tricontinental's little Code Pink or the People's Forum afraid, but it is going to make others afraid that, you know, aren't, you know, their lives aren't about trying to force power to quit lying and stop manipulating its citizens. I mean, we talked about these, you know, these words, democracy, and all these words that are getting used to lock people in with their hearts and minds to be used. And I think that's one of them. It's just that we get attached to these words, but we don't think about what they mean or how they're being played against us and how we're being used by them for the needs of power that has nothing to do with democracy. 65% of the people in the United States don't want to be sending these weapons to Ukraine. So, you know, it's also, you mentioned, you know, the Chinese government spends way less than the United States government on weapons and war. They spend the money on their people. And change happens in China rapidly, where here we seem to be in a status quo, nothing changing, election after election after election.
Yeah, this is not a point where the U.S. should be trying to become condescending toward anybody, given you know, what's happening here. And I think it's really important what you pointed out too, because this is something Scott and I talk about all the time. There's a big diversity among the ruling class, really, because you have Milley, the Council on Foreign Relations has had articles in foreign policy. The Journal of Foreign Relations, they both had articles questioning this. I've seen the Wall Street Journal have op-eds in there. So, you know, they're pretending they're going after smallest groups and saying these are a bunch of radical socialists. And their target really isn't, I mean, their target is other lefties, I think, to get, you know, to make you people act suspicious or whatever. So it's truly bizarre. We're getting close.
But like I said, it also is their goal. They know they have everybody else, is to garner the progressive movement in support, you know, which is also what they've done for Ukraine. You know, shockingly, people that I've been in the streets with for 4 decades for peace, all of a sudden they're like, no, we have to send more weapons. I'm like, when did, you know, sending weapons not kill people? You know, just
the NATO left, the China. I mean, I've been called Putin's puppet, Putin's bitch, you know, and it's just staggering. I'm just mystified, like the political culture and the political language we have here. So,
well, I think what McCarthyism did, and I think that's, you know, what you want to talk about, is that it's a distortion to our thinking, and that what we want is for people to understand that what does that mean? Because it's not about me, it's about you, it's about the reader, it's about the listener. And it's to think about, not only is your government using 65% of your tax dollars to destroy the world for you, but it is also really messing with your mind. Because, you know, what is the psychops behind this? Somebody studied every single sentence in that article was constructed to mess with your mind.
Yeah.
It's actually a sentence construction that comes out of the CIA. That is, how do you construct these sentences? Now, those are sentences that are being used in elections. You know, it were very, if you study the election of Modi or Bolsonaro, it's the same way they use those sentences to affect elections.
Guy in Argentina now. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think what's important is that to look at it and say, be mad for yourself, be angry for yourself. That, you know, that here is what is supposedly the paper of record. It's treating you badly. I mean, it's like, when I read it, I was sorry for the writers. I was sorry for the Asian Americans where hate will increase because of this. And I was really sorry for the readers that they have been subjected to this. And it's the same as PBS censoring a film that could have made you a little bit smarter. I mean, it's really interesting, that film. Like, how do you actually take people out of poverty had an interesting cycle of thought that we don't have. It got some scary shit in it. You know, it's like, let's learn, like, that we're not allowed to think critically, that everything we're given is a bifurcation. It's a either or, is a disservice to our minds and a disservice to our hearts. And I think that's criminal.
So going forward, if anybody sees Marco Rubio, you can throw a pie in his face, I guess. But going forward, I know people are going to want to talk to you. Hopefully you're getting good media support from the left media.
Yes, so much.
Oh, good. But what do you tell people going forward? People who may be skeptical, even, you know, like, why are you guys doing this? What do you say?
We just say, of course, we don't listen to the Chinese government. I don't even know what its talking points are or what its propaganda is. So I wouldn't even know how to do it. If a Chinese talking point is about peace, then I'm sorry for the United States for giving up the word peace to China. I missed that.
They've always done that throughout the McCarthy Cold War period, right? Peace becomes a subversive word or subversive goal.
Yeah, I mean, W.E. Du Bois got, kicked out of the country. He had a peace organization that was saying no to nuclear war, and had to go live the rest of his life in Ghana. So we know this country will do that. And the other thing that was brought up is the Uyghurs, and here we are, Code Pink, an organization that has spent the last 22 years of its existence protecting the lives and human rights of Muslims in Iran, in Iraq, in Palestine, in Yemen, in Syria, in Afghanistan. It's like really what our work has been focused on. To say that we don't care about the human rights of Uyghurs just is insane. Yes, we care about the human rights of Uyghurs, and we care that you are using Uyghurs as a weapon to take us to war on China. That's not going to help the human rights of Uyghurs, since the first casualty of is truth, and the second casualty is human rights. So for all of human rights, we have to end war, but certainly it's not going to help the human rights of the Uyghurs.
Well, I met you, I think, 20 years ago in Houston, and I've, been a big follower of Code Pink since then, and the work you guys do on all kinds of stuff, but especially recently on China and Ukraine. And I'm a big, Cuba is very important to me, so I'm really glad you spent a lot of time. You have a lot of trips there and trying to help out.
But you just got back from delivering a lot of supplies.
Oh, wonderful.
Medical supplies. She came back today.
Oh, wonderful. And if you're interested, the best way would be just to look up Code Pink.
Code Pink.
Okay. Any last things you want to say? Any advice or any last thoughts?
Yeah, right now it's just like the best thing is just to have the courage of your values, to speak up, because right now is not the time to be silent and to be silenced, which was the intention of this.
Sure.
And also just to not let people let you think in either ors. As soon as you see that happen, know you're being used. And for peace and for the planet right now, we need to stop the funding of war. Any preparation for war is war. And it's a violence to, I mean, even just start by feeling what it is to be an Asian American, or the indigenous peoples of the islands where the US is building these military bases that is destroying their ecosystem and violating all their human rights right now. So this is happening, and it's what it's like we call this the summer of peace, because we just like, please just raise up peace in every way. Like, put a peace flag up, paint it on your wall. That it's become a dirty word. Like, one simple thing you can do is just not.
They did even give your earrings some space in the article, right? Yeah. When they talk about your earrings in your wedding, you know they're really grass. One last thing I forgot to ask earlier. Have you had any, kind of reaching out or support from any, like Bernie Sanders or the squad or anyone like that in DC? Or
Yes.
they have? Okay,
Yes.
good.
They wrote right away the same day. They were so sorry. Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry it happened too, but really glad for all the work you've done for so long, and you really are one of the kind of northern stars, North Stars for all of us. So we really do appreciate it, and we'll be following this. And if there's anything coming up, we can have you on again and talk about it, because I think it is important, and it's unfortunately way more widespread, and we'll probably see more of this. So.
Well, I'd love to introduce you to some of the Chinese voices. I mean,
That'd be
because
great.
what I feel is that they did, what they do is they dehumanize us.
Yeah.
And this campaign is all just about humanizing. And there are so many young Chinese Americans that are really going through a disturbing place. And I feel like if citizens of the United States understood what them allowing this to happen is doing to people right now, it's like, you don't even I would love you to care about the 1.4 billion people in China or the rest of Asia, because Malaysia, Vietnam, like everything around China, don't you think they feel anxiety? Korea, it's that this talk is not cheap. It's real, and it has effects. And so just to be able to listen to some of these beautiful people that are being crushed right now. A judge in San Francisco, 40 years a judge, can't leave her home. I mean, that's real stuff, and it's not good. It's embarrassing, shameful.
Well,
but Be for Peace, thank you so much for what you do each week to help people not be sucked into the madness and to be in debate.
That's what we're trying to do. Let people know that they're not alone out there.
Yes, thank you. That's what we all need to be doing. What you're doing is what everyone needs to do. Have the conversations.
Well, thank you. This is a Green and Red podcast. So if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe and like it. And same with the podcast platforms. And we're on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. And Scott always does these pitches, so I'm kind of sketchy at it. And then we are at greenandredpodcast.org, and you can go there. If you want to donate, there's a button. It says support. We're also on Patreon, so we can do all that stuff. So if you like what we're doing here and you want to send a few dimes this way, a little bit extra money, whether it folds or jingles, we would be glad to take it. We operate on less than a shoestring here, so we do appreciate all the support we get, and it gives us the chance to talk to people like Jodie Evans, who are really doing like exemplary work out there. So thank you very much, and the rest of you, make sure you follow us, and we'll see you again soon.